She showed her ticket. She answered every question. But the flight attendant didn't care. In front of the whole cabin, she slapped her. What no one knew? The quiet woman in seat 3A wasn't just any passenger. She was the lawyer of the billionaire sitting right behind her. And he was about to turn the entire airline upside down. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next one. The airport buzzed softly with the usual morning rush, but inside the first-class cabin, everything felt still and orderly. Vanessa Clark stepped aboard, dressed in a crisp gray blazer over a cream blouse, her posture relaxed but precise. She was a young black woman, sharp-featured and composed, with her dark hair pulled into a smooth, low bun. A slim leather briefcase rested on her shoulder, and she moved quietly, her eyes scanning the cabin as she walked toward seat 3A. Vanessa placed her briefcase gently under the seat, pulled out a slim folder and sat down, her attention already on the legal documents inside. She wasn't there to impress anyone. She was there to work. It was a routine flight for her, just another trip to finalize a corporate acquisition. Her ticket had been booked by her firm's private concierge, as usual. Everything was in order. As she settled in, reviewing notes on her tablet, she noticed something. A woman in uniform was staring at her from the aisle. Diana Briggs, the senior flight attendant, stood stiffly with a clipboard in hand, her expression unreadable. Tall, pale-skinned, with icy blue eyes and her blonde hair tied into a tight bun, Diana began to move toward Vanessa with slow, pointed steps. "Excuse me, ma'am," Diana said, her voice edged with something cold. "Are you sure this is your seat?" Vanessa looked up, her tone respectful but firm. "Yes. 3A. She reached into her blazer pocket and handed over her boarding pass without hesitation. Diana took it, barely glancing at it before frowning. "This is a first-class seat," Diana said slowly. "Are you traveling with someone?" "No," Vanessa replied, her voice even. "I'm traveling alone." Diana's eyes narrowed. She returned the boarding pass but didn't step away. "I'll need to see your ID, please." The request drew a small pause. Not because Vanessa had anything to hide, but because she noticed Diana hadn't asked for ID from any of the men seated before her. Still, she kept her cool. She pulled out her ID and handed it over. Diana examined it a little too long, then handed it back. "What's the reason for your travel today?" The question floated out across the cabin. A few heads turned. The men across the aisle began glancing up from their tablets. Vanessa didn't move. "Business," she said simply. The tone shifted then. Diana crossed her arms. "You're being awfully defensive. I'm just doing my job." "I answered all your questions," Vanessa replied, still steady, but her pulse had quickened. "You haven't asked anyone else these things." That's when it happened. Without warning, Diana stepped forward, her hand rising swiftly, and slapped Vanessa across the face. The sound cracked like glass in the silence. Gasps filled the cabin. One woman clutched her chest. Someone dropped a coffee cup. Vanessa sat frozen. Her jaw tightened, but she didn't speak. She didn't flinch. She simply turned her face back toward the aisle, the red imprint of Diana's hand already forming on her cheek. "You were being aggressive," Diana said loudly, her voice almost shaking. "You raised your voice. That's not tolerated in first class." Nobody moved. Nobody said a word. But one row behind Vanessa, a man set down his coffee slowly, his fingers curling around the armrest. He had been quiet since the moment he boarded. Elliot Grant, black, tall, sharply dressed in a charcoal suit and silent behind a pair of reading glasses, lifted his gaze toward Diana. His face remained calm, but his eyes locked onto her like a scope. Elliot was not just any man in first class. He was one of the most powerful private investors on the East Coast. And the woman Diana had just slapped? She was his lawyer. And what was about to happen next? Diana had no idea what she had just started. Vanessa didn't speak for a full minute. The sting on her cheek was hot, but it wasn't the pain that shook her. It was the weight of what had just happened in front of an entire cabin of silent faces. She looked ahead, refusing to give Diana the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. Her fingers, however, trembled slightly as she reached for her tablet, locking the screen with a quiet tap. From behind her, Elliot leaned forward just slightly, enough to speak without raising his voice. "Are you all right?" he asked. Vanessa gave a small nod without turning around. "I'm fine," she said. But that was assault. Elliot's voice was calm, too calm. "I know." He reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, typing with surgical precision. Vanessa's phone buzzed softly in her seat back pocket. She glanced down, pulled it out, and read the message. "Say nothing more. I'm handling it now." She replied just as quietly. "She hit me. In front of everyone." "And every one of them saw it," Elliot replied, "which makes it even better." Meanwhile, Diana walked briskly back toward the galley, her steps clipped, her chin high. Her jaw was set like stone. In her mind, the matter was closed. She had handled it, as she had so many times before with passengers who didn't fit. She poured herself a glass of water, hands slightly unsteady, but she still carried the air of someone convinced she was untouchable. Across from her, another flight attendant stood watching silently. Jessica Mills, younger, softer-spoken, and relatively new to the crew, hesitated before speaking. "Did she actually raise her voice?" Jessica asked. Diana didn't look up. She was confrontational. I don't care how calm she looked. She had attitude. I've flown long enough to recognize that. Jessica said nothing, but her eyes lingered on Diana a moment longer than usual. Back in her seat, Vanessa's expression was unreadable. She tucked her tablet away and folded her hands in her lap, breathing slowly through her nose. Across the aisle, passengers avoided eye contact. Some were suddenly very interested in their in-flight magazines. One man, older with gray hair and a Rolex, looked like he wanted to say something, then thought better of it. The power in the room had shifted, and the only person who didn't seem to realize it was Diana. Elliot leaned back in his seat and made a call, quiet, quick, and coded. The man on the other end was his private airline attorney. Elliot didn't explain much. He didn't need to. Just a few sentences. "Senior flight attendant struck my attorney in first class. I want ground intervention arranged immediately. And notify the board." He hung up, slid the phone into his coat, and adjusted his cuffs like nothing had happened. Vanessa took another deep breath. "This isn't over." Elliot didn't answer, because he already knew it wasn't. Diana returned to the cabin 15 minutes later, her face composed, her posture stiff, carrying a tray of drinks like nothing had happened. The tension in the air was heavy, but she acted as if it didn't exist. She stopped at row 1, offering a forced smile to a passenger who barely nodded back. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Vanessa's seat, but she didn't stop. She continued down the aisle, skipping row 3 entirely. Vanessa didn't acknowledge her either. She sat straight-backed, hands folded over her briefcase. Her cheek still carried a faint pink mark, but her expression was calm, detached. Too calm. Passengers around them noticed the silence. It was the kind of silence that made people uncomfortable, made them glance over shoulders and whisper behind napkins. No one dared say what they saw, but the truth sat between every row, unspoken and undeniable. In the galley, Jessica watched Diana set down the empty tray with a little more force than necessary. "You should report it yourself," Jessica said under her breath. Diana shot her a glare. "Report what? She caused a scene. I kept it under control." Jessica hesitated. "But you hit her." "It was a warning tap," Diana snapped. "Nothing serious." Jessica looked away, swallowing her thoughts. Far above the cabin, in the cockpit, the first officer glanced at the captain who had just ended a phone call from ground operations. "Was that from HQ?" the first officer asked. The captain nodded. "Yeah, executive alert, passenger in seat 3A. Situation on board, legal counsel to Elliot Grant." The name alone made the first officer sit up straighter. "The Elliot Grant?" "Yep, and guess what? The captain raised an eyebrow. She got slapped. By a flight attendant. There was a long pause. And Mr. Grant's response? The captain's lips thinned. He's already activated the legal response team. He's flying quiet, but not passive. The intercom beeped twice. Can you send Diana Briggs to the cockpit? The captain said calmly, speaking into the cabin line. Immediately. Back in the cabin, Diana froze as the call echoed from the overhead speakers. Passengers looked up. She adjusted her jacket quickly and made her way to the front. Her walk was a little less steady now. As she stepped inside the cockpit and closed the door, the captain turned in his seat. Ms. Briggs, I need a clear explanation of what happened in 3A. Diana opened her mouth, but the captain cut her off with a raised hand. This isn't a casual check-in. We've received direct instructions from the executive office. Mr. Grant is on board. You laid hands on his attorney. I didn't know who she was, Diana replied, her voice defensive now. She was confrontational. I was trying to maintain order. Did you verify her ticket? The captain asked. Yes. Did she disobey any orders? Diana paused. No, but did she physically threaten you in any way? Silence. No, Diana admitted. The captain leaned back slowly. You're to return to her seat and apologize, in front of everyone, and when this flight lands, you're to remain on board until security arrives. But, she began. That's not a request, the captain said, his voice hardening. That's a directive from the top. Diana stood frozen. Her world, just minutes ago so controlled, was starting to fall apart, and she had no idea how much further it would drop. Diana stepped out of the cockpit like someone walking into a courtroom. Her steps were slower now, each one heavier than the last. The passengers didn't speak, but their eyes followed her. The calm confidence she once carried had started to crack, and the tension was thick enough to choke on. She reached row 3 and stopped. Vanessa looked up. So did Elliot. Diana lowered herself slightly, crouching down to be at eye level. Her voice was softer now, but not steady. Ms. Clark, she began, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. There's been a misunderstanding. I want to apologize for the earlier incident. It wasn't my intention to make you feel. Vanessa raised one hand gently. No, she said. Don't reframe it. You hit me. A few passengers nearby turned slightly in their seats. They were listening. Diana blinked. I admit I may have overreacted, but I was trying to keep things from escalating. Vanessa's voice was calm but clear. I had a ticket. I had ID. I answered every question. And then, you slapped me in front of a cabin full of people. Diana's eyes darted around, looking for support that didn't come. Even Jessica, standing near the galley, looked away. You're right, Diana said quietly. I made a mistake in judgment. No, Vanessa replied. You made an assumption. That's not a mistake. That's a decision. The silence spread again, and this time it was uncomfortable for everyone, not just Diana. Elliot leaned forward slightly. Miss Briggs, would you agree this apology is public? Diana hesitated. Yes. Yes, it is. Elliot nodded once. Then sat back again, saying nothing more. Vanessa didn't smile. She didn't nod. She simply said, Then I expect it to stay on record. Diana stood up, her cheeks burning, and hurried back toward the front, her mind spinning. She had expected a scene. She hadn't expected silence to feel so loud. Back in the galley, she leaned against the counter and exhaled shakily. Jessica watched her, arms crossed. They didn't raise their voices, Jessica said. You did. Diana didn't reply, because there was nothing left to say, and for the first time in her career she felt what it was like to be powerless in her own cabin. Vanessa turned her face back toward the window, but her reflection in the glass showed more than the outside clouds. It showed strength holding itself steady. She wasn't shaken anymore, just still, composed. The echo of the slap no longer stung, not because it didn't hurt, but because she had taken back the air in the room without raising her voice. Elliot shifted slightly in his seat. His phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen, reading the update from his legal team. Incident confirmed. Statement drafted. Full passenger reports being collected. Airline CEO notified. He typed back without emotion. Begin internal inquiry request. This will not be quiet. He set the phone aside, then leaned slightly toward Vanessa. You handled that well, he said, his voice just above a whisper. She made it easy, Vanessa replied. You could feel it the moment she looked at me, like I didn't belong. Elliot nodded slowly. That's what made it dangerous. Across the aisle, passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked down, others checked their phones, pretending to be distracted. But the truth hovered between them. They had witnessed the humiliation, and now they were witnessing the fallout, but from a distance. No one had spoken when it mattered. No one had intervened. And now, every glance they gave felt like an apology they didn't have the courage to speak out loud. In the galley, Diana gripped the edge of the counter. Her breath was uneven. Her mind raced. She had been flying for over 13 years, built a reputation for order, for discipline, but in one moment, one slap, she had flipped the entire flight upside down. Jessica stood nearby, slowly stirring a cup of tea she didn't really want. You know they're going to write statements, she said quietly. Diana didn't look at her. I already gave mine. Jessica tilted her head. Did yours include the part where you slapped her for answering a question? Diana turned sharply. You think I wanted this to happen? Jessica didn't flinch. I think you thought she was someone you could get away with hitting. Silence. Diana looked down at her hands. Her fingers trembled. Back in row 3, Vanessa unlocked her phone. A message from the firm partner had come in. We've been informed. CEO has called Elliot directly. PR crisis team is preparing an internal report. She looked at Elliot. He raised one eyebrow, calmly. She's not getting off this flight the same way she came on, Vanessa said quietly. No, Elliot replied, and neither is this airline. The seatbelt sign chimed above them, but inside the cabin, the pressure wasn't just from the altitude. It was the weight of what came next. The aircraft cruised steadily above the clouds, but inside the cabin nothing felt smooth. The tension that had once been focused on one moment now stretched across the entire flight. The air was heavier. Conversations were quiet, eyes more cautious, movements more restrained. Diana didn't return to row 3 again. She stayed mostly hidden in the galley, stepping out only when absolutely necessary, and even then, her steps lacked the authority they once had. Vanessa sat motionless, her legs crossed neatly, tablet untouched, her hands resting lightly in her lap. Her mind, however, was anything but still. She had replayed the moment again and again, not just the slap, but the build-up, the disbelief in Diana's face, the entitlement in her tone. It wasn't just about her being struck. It was about everything behind it, everything Diana had decided about her in a matter of seconds. Elliot remained composed, the image of restraint, but beneath that stillness was calculation. His firm, Blackridge Holdings, wasn't just powerful. It was influential at levels most corporations never reached. Airlines relied on people like him, investors, strategists, legal minds. And right now, Elliot wasn't flying as a passenger. He was flying as a man who had just watched his top legal advisor get assaulted by someone hired to serve them both. He opened his phone again. Another message from the firm's internal legal counsel lit up the screen. Full passenger manifest secured. Multiple eyewitnesses confirmed. A passenger in row 5 is recording a statement now. His fingers flew across the screen. Compile all. Include timeline. I want this in front of the airline board within 6 hours of landing. He closed the message and looked toward the aisle. Across the cabin, a man in a blazer, the one who had earlier looked away during the incident, now leaned toward Vanessa. His face was apologetic, his eyes avoiding direct contact. I saw what happened earlier, he said awkwardly. That wasn't right. Vanessa turned slowly to look at him. She didn't speak. She let the pause hang in the air. He shifted in his seat. It's just, things can get tense on flights. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding, she asked, her voice even. The man hesitated, then nodded weakly. Yeah, maybe. Vanessa held his gaze. Did she ask for your ID? No, he admitted. Did she question why you were in first class? He blinked. No. Vanessa nodded slowly. Then maybe you shouldn't be the one explaining what happened. The man swallowed hard and sat back in his seat, silent. Elliot exhaled through his nose, just a whisper of approval. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The truth in her words was sharp enough. In the galley, Diana finally sat down on the small crew bench, burying her face in her hands. Her thoughts spiraled. She had never imagined her career could fracture in the middle of a flight. Not like this. Not over something that, in her mind, had once been routine. She had been the one who made decisions, controlled the atmosphere, enforced the standards. Now, she was waiting to be told what came next. Jessica sat across from her, silent. For a while, neither of them said anything. Then Jessica finally spoke. You picked the wrong one today. Diana looked up. What's that supposed to mean? She's not going to cry in the lavatory, Jessica said. She's not going to post a video for sympathy. She's not going to cause a scene. Diana frowned. She's going to change the story, Jessica finished. That's the kind of woman you slapped. The words hit harder than Diana expected. She slouched back, her fingers digging into her palms, but she didn't respond. In row 3, Vanessa checked her phone. Another message had come through. CEO wants a private call with you after landing. He's furious. Stand by for gateside protocol. She showed the screen to Elliot. He read it, nodded once, then said quietly, Good. He turned his head just enough to glance toward the front of the plane. Because the next time Diana came down that aisle, it wouldn't be for service. It would be for accountability. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the plane began its gentle descent toward the final hour of flight. Tray tables clinked shut, blankets folded, drinks were cleared. But despite the quiet rituals of a long-haul journey winding down, the atmosphere remained tense. Most of the passengers were still pretending to be absorbed in their books or screens, but everyone was aware that something serious had happened. Something that wasn't going away with just an apology. Vanessa remained composed, her eyes fixed on the clouds outside the window. But beneath that calm, her mind was razor-sharp. She wasn't just a lawyer. She was a strategist. And right now, she was mentally building a case. Every moment since boarding had left a trail of evidence. Passenger reactions, crew behavior, recorded messages, the silent complicity of those who said nothing. She remembered faces, remembered who looked away, remembered who stared. Elliot turned slightly in his seat, his voice low but firm. They're planning damage control. That call from the CEO isn't just an apology. It's a containment move. Vanessa nodded. Of course. They know this isn't just a headline, it's a liability. Not just that, Elliot said. It's personal now. I've worked with these people. I've sat in boardrooms with half the executives who sign off on cabin training. If this hits the media before we land, they'll scramble. Vanessa gave a faint smile. Then maybe we don't give them time to scramble. At the front of the aircraft, Diana stood at the galley counter, staring blankly at the service schedule. She wasn't reading it. Her thoughts had drifted far from snacks and passenger requests. Her hands shook just slightly as she smoothed the front of her uniform. She had spent years building herself into the ideal crew member. Efficient, respected, a little feared by junior staff. But this time, authority hadn't protected her, and respect had evaporated the moment the captain used the words, executive directive. Jessica broke the silence behind her. They're watching you, she said softly. Diana turned. What? The passengers, the crew, everyone. They're not looking at Elliot anymore. They're looking at you, wondering what you're going to do next, wondering if you even know what you've done. Diana opened her mouth to argue, but no words came. She had always believed that her instincts were right, that she could read people, that she knew who belonged where. But for the first time, she had acted on a bias so strong, it had stripped her of reason. Back in row 3, Vanessa's phone vibrated again. She glanced down and opened the message from her firm's senior partner. "Media team is prepped. We'll hold back release for 1 hour post-landing unless instructed. Security protocol has been activated at the gate." She showed it to Elliot. He read it and gave a quiet nod. Then he leaned forward, hands steepled. "When we land, you speak first." Vanessa looked at him surprised. "You don't want to lead?" "No," he replied. "You're the one they underestimated. Let them hear your voice." Her eyes met his, and for a long second, neither of them said a word. Across the aisle, a woman in business attire suddenly turned to Vanessa. I'm sorry," she said, voice shaky, "for not saying something. I saw what happened. I was shocked." Vanessa studied her. "Why didn't you speak up?" The woman's face flushed. "I don't know. I thought someone else would." Vanessa didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't smile. She simply said, "That's the problem." The woman nodded, then looked away, guilt settling across her shoulders. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened and seats are in their upright positions. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." Diana stepped forward to make her way through the cabin. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the intercom to repeat the safety reminder. But her voice caught before she could speak. Her throat tightened. For a split second, she saw Vanessa's face again in her mind. Not angry, not crying, not hysterical, just steady. She lowered the intercom and backed away from the aisle. She couldn't face her. Not yet. Jessica took the handset instead and calmly issued the announcement. Diana stood still, frozen in place, wondering not just what would happen when the wheels hit the runway, but what would be waiting for her the moment that door opened. The nose of the aircraft tilted ever so slightly as the captain began his final descent. The clouds outside the windows turned golden with the late afternoon sun, casting soft light across the cabin. But inside, no one was relaxed. Not really. The plane was quiet, unnaturally so. There was no chatter, no laughter, no casual conversation about connecting flights or vacation plans. Even the flight attendants moved more carefully now, aware that every gesture was being watched. Vanessa remained upright in her seat, seatbelt fastened, her arms resting gently on the armrests. Her eyes weren't on her phone anymore. They were scanning the aisle, reading the mood, sensing the shift. Everyone could feel it, even those who didn't fully understand what had unfolded. They could sense that something had gone wrong, and that someone important had been wronged. Elliot, seated beside her, had already received confirmation from ground operations. A security detail would be waiting at the gate, not for protection, but for action. His legal team would be there too. Statements would be taken. Press, if needed, would be briefed. He turned to Vanessa and spoke softly. "You don't need to prove anything when we land. You already did." Vanessa gave a small nod, but her eyes didn't soften. "I'm not done yet." 3 rows back, a middle-aged man cleared his throat and leaned forward, speaking low so only the woman next to him could hear. "Do you think she's going to lose her job?" he asked. The woman replied without looking at him. "She should." Near the front of the plane, Diana stood alone in the galley, gripping the counter again, palms damp, stomach clenched. Her mind jumped from one thought to another, each worse than the last. She wondered if she should go back and speak to Vanessa again. Say more, try harder. But she knew it wouldn't matter. Words couldn't undo what had happened. The more she replayed the scene in her head, the more she hated how quickly she had acted, how natural it had felt at the time, how automatic her judgment had been. Jessica entered the galley quietly and handed Diana a small glass of water. "Drink," she said. Diana took it without speaking. Jessica looked at her carefully. "They're not going to forget what happened just because we land." "I know," Diana whispered. No, Jessica said firmly. I mean, your name is going to be known. It won't stop at corporate. It won't stop at a review. Diana stared at her. You think I don't already know that? Jessica looked back at her evenly. Then stop pretending like you're the victim. The words cut deeper than anything the passengers had said, and Diana didn't respond. In row 3, Vanessa reached for her phone again. Another message from her firm's media advisor. Situation trending internally. PR holding statements on standby. Confirm when you're off the aircraft. She placed the phone face down on her tray table. It didn't matter if the world knew immediately or 10 minutes later. The damage was done. Not just to her, but to the company, to the culture that allowed people like Diana to act with confidence, knowing the uniform would protect them. Elliot checked his watch. 10 minutes, he said. You good? Vanessa took a breath. I'm more than good. The captain came back over the intercom. Cabin crew, take your seats for landing. The hum of the engines lowered. The plane began to dip more steeply now. Window views shifted from clouds to city lights in the distance. Diana slowly took her jump seat and clipped in. Her hands rested on her knees, knuckles white. Jessica sat across from her and didn't speak. As the landing gear extended and the runway approached, Vanessa didn't look out the window. She looked forward, toward the front of the cabin, because that was where it would all begin. The wheels of the plane touched the runway with a soft thud, the cabin jolting slightly before smoothing into a steady glide. A few passengers instinctively exhaled, the way people often did after a long flight. But this time, it wasn't relief they felt. It was anticipation. Something about the landing didn't mark the end of the journey. It felt like a transition, an entry point into consequences, into accountability. No one said it out loud, but nearly everyone knew that whatever happened in the air wasn't staying there. The plane taxied slowly toward the gate. The seatbelt signs remained lit, the voice of the captain calm as ever. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. The local time is 4:15 p.m. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we reach the gate and the sign is turned off. On behalf of our crew, thank you for flying with us. Vanessa sat motionless, hands resting on her knees, spine straight. Her phone buzzed again, and this time she picked it up immediately. The screen lit up with a new message from the firm's crisis manager. Gate team in position. Security confirmed. Airline legal counsel requested immediate meeting with you and Mr. Grant in executive lounge. She turned to Elliot. They want to meet right after deplaning. Elliot nodded once. Let them wait. A few rows up, passengers were already pulling bags from overhead compartments, even though the plane hadn't stopped. The tension made everyone act with that extra edge. Overly polite to crew, overly careful with luggage. Most people weren't nervous about making a connection. They were nervous about being connected to what just happened. The seatbelt sign dinged off, cabin lights brightened, and then the real silence began. No one moved from row 3. Vanessa remained seated, her bag still under the seat. Elliot sat beside her, calm as ever, his phone dark and tucked away. They weren't in a hurry, they didn't need to be. At the front of the cabin, the aircraft door unsealed with a loud mechanical click. Then came the sound no one expected to hear. Footsteps, heavy, measured, not rushing to grab a suitcase or check a connection. A man stepped into the cabin in a sharp navy uniform, security. He moved with quiet purpose. Behind him stood another in a black suit, wearing a lanyard with the airline's corporate emblem. Their presence was like cold air rushing through the warm, stale cabin. The man in uniform scanned the faces, then spoke plainly. Is Ms. Diana Briggs present? The question didn't echo. It landed. Hard. Diana, still belted into her jump seat near the front galley, slowly stood, her face pale. Yes, she said, voice barely above a whisper. The security officer nodded. You'll need to come with us. You are being formally requested for questioning by airline legal counsel and executive oversight. Gasps. No longer from surprise, but from confirmation. It was real. There would be consequences. She wasn't going to disappear quietly behind the curtain. Jessica rose from her seat near the front, eyes wide but unmoving. Vanessa watched the entire exchange from her seat. Her posture didn't change. But when Diana turned her head slightly, as if looking back at row 3 one last time, Vanessa met her gaze, not with anger, not with pity, but with the steady certainty of someone who had not only been wronged, but had taken back control. Diana looked away, and then she was gone, escorted through the front exit. No luggage, no fanfare, no shield of authority left. A long pause followed. Finally, a few passengers began to stand, slowly, awkwardly, unsure how to proceed. Vanessa remained seated, even as the aisle began to fill with shuffling feet and pulled bags. Elliot stood and retrieved her bag for her, placing it gently in front of her feet. "Ready?" he asked. Vanessa looked down at the bag, then up toward the front of the plane. "Yes," she said, "but let's not go out the front." Elliot raised an eyebrow. "We leave with the rest of them," she said. "Let them see what it looks like when someone walks off with dignity." They stepped into the aisle together, shoulder to shoulder, as more eyes turned toward them. But this time, those eyes weren't full of judgment. They were full of realization and quiet, overdue respect. Vanessa and Elliot moved down the narrow aisle slowly, not with hesitation, but with quiet control. Every step was deliberate. Every glance they received, every subtle shift in posture from the passengers around them, spoke volumes. No one dared meet Vanessa's gaze for too long, not because she was intimidating, but because they knew they had witnessed something shameful and done nothing. As they reached the back of the cabin, a young woman in a navy blue pantsuit, maybe in her mid-30s, shifted aside to make room. She held her tablet to her chest like a shield and gave a nervous smile. I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do earlier." Vanessa stopped, not out of politeness, but to make the moment mean something. "You did what most people do," she said calmly. "You stayed quiet." The woman nodded slowly, her face flushed. "I should have said something." "You still can," Vanessa replied, "but not for me. For the next person." The woman didn't respond, but her face told the truth. Guilt had settled in, and it wasn't going anywhere. They continued toward the rear exit, where a second airline operations staff member stood waiting near the open door, flanked by 2 airport officials in plain clothes. As soon as they spotted Elliot, they straightened their posture. "Mr. Grant," one of them said quickly, "we've arranged a private transport and secured the executive conference lounge. Your counsel is already on site." Elliot shook his head. "We'll debrief there, but we walk through this terminal just like anyone else. No backdoor nonsense." The man blinked, unsure. "Understood. Of course." Vanessa stepped off the aircraft first, the air in the jet bridge cooler than she expected, a sudden stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere inside. She felt the shift immediately, not just physically, but emotionally. The moment her foot hit the bridge floor, the control Diana had tried to exert over her back in the cabin was gone, completely. And now, what replaced it wasn't just freedom. It was position, voice, power. Inside the terminal, the airline's executive liaison stood waiting near the corridor, a stern woman in a dark red blazer with a corporate pin. Behind her, 3 members of the airline's legal and HR teams stood by a frosted glass door, clipboards and tablets in hand, eyes scanning everyone walking out of the gate. They didn't look relaxed. They looked like people preparing for impact. As Elliot and Vanessa approached, the woman in the red blazer stepped forward. "Ms. Clark," she said quickly, extending a hand, "I want to personally apologize." Vanessa didn't take her hand. "Let's skip the surface-level regret," she said. "Your apology was due back in the air. We're past that." The woman faltered. "We understand this is serious. We're treating it with the highest level of urgency. Ms. Briggs has been placed under immediate review." "Not review," Vanessa corrected. "Investigation." Elliot stepped forward now, his voice low but with a weight that made the group flinch. Let's make this clear, he said. There will be a written statement from your office within 24 hours acknowledging not only the incident but the system failures that enabled it. That includes training gaps, lack of cabin accountability, and unchecked behavioral bias among senior staff. The legal representative cleared his throat. We'd prefer to begin those discussions in the lounge, where— We're not here for a discussion, Vanessa said. We're here for acknowledgement. The time for discussion passed the moment your employee raised her hand against me. The red blazer woman swallowed hard, her voice thinner now. Of course, if you'll allow us, we'd like to escort you both. No need, Elliot cut in. We know the way. With that, they walked past the group without another word, their strides calm, unhurried. The terminal ahead of them buzzed with its usual noise, announcements, luggage wheels, distant boarding calls. But as they moved forward, it all seemed to fade into the background. Vanessa felt the eyes again, passengers who had seen the slap, watched the fallout, now witnessing the result. She didn't wear pride on her face. She didn't walk like someone seeking attention. But the dignity in her presence forced people to step back, to reassess. One young man near a coffee kiosk whispered to his friend, "That's her." "Who?" the friend asked. "The lawyer, the one who got slapped. They're saying her boss owns a stake in the airline." Damn, and she didn't even flinch. Vanessa heard none of it. She was focused ahead. As they approached the glass doors of the executive wing, Vanessa paused and turned to Elliot. "I don't want her just suspended," she said. "I want it written into policy that no crew member lays a hand on a passenger without investigation and third-party review. I want that on record." Elliot nodded. "It will be." "And after that," she said, her voice sharp with clarity, "I want to walk through this airport again one day and not have to wonder if I'll be treated like I don't belong." Elliot looked her in the eye. "You just made sure that one day comes a lot sooner." The glass doors opened and they stepped inside. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of everything that would follow. Inside the executive conference suite, the air was polished. Sterile walls, soft overhead lighting, high-end leather chairs arranged around a long oak table, bottled water lined up neatly along the center. But despite the luxury, the atmosphere was cold, formal, tense. As Vanessa and Elliot stepped in, 5 members of the airline's senior leadership team stood waiting. 3 of them she recognized from past legal negotiations. One was the company's legal affairs director, the other, the chief operating officer. And seated at the head of the table, arms folded, expression unreadable, was the airline's chief executive officer, Russell Langley. Russell rose to greet them, offering his hand. Vanessa didn't take it. "Ms. Clark, Mr. Grant," he began, voice careful, diplomatic. "Thank you for agreeing to meet on short notice. I want to begin by saying how deeply sorry I am for the incident you were forced to endure on our aircraft. It was inexcusable and wholly unreflective of our company values." Elliot didn't sit right away. He stood behind Vanessa's chair, his silence a statement of its own. "I don't need your values," Vanessa said evenly. "I need your accountability." Russell's smile dropped. He nodded slightly, gesturing for everyone to take their seats. They did. A woman from the legal department opened a folder and slid it across to Vanessa. "This is a formal letter of apology, approved by our board, along with a preliminary outline of our internal investigation into Ms. Briggs's conduct. She has been removed from duty and placed on indefinite suspension pending outcome." Vanessa didn't touch the letter. "I'd like to know when that investigation began," she asked. There was a pause. "About 20 minutes after your arrival was confirmed," the COO said. "So, after she was escorted off the aircraft," Vanessa clarified. "Yes," the woman replied. Vanessa's gaze was sharp. "Not when she slapped me, not when passengers saw it, not when she lied about it in front of them. Only after it reached your internal channels." Russell leaned forward. "That's unfortunately true, and we regret that delay. We are now fully mobilizing all necessary procedures." Vanessa cut in. I've been a corporate attorney long enough to know what happens when a company says we regret the delay. It means you waited to see how bad the fallout would be before taking action. The room went silent again. Elliot finally spoke. Let's not waste time with performance apologies. We're here because your airline made a choice, a cultural one, and we're not just talking about a slap. We're talking about unchecked authority that allowed it to happen. Russell sat back, his jaw tight. Vanessa folded her arms. She didn't doubt my ticket. She didn't question my ID. She questioned my presence. That's not training failure. That's system failure. The head of HR leaned forward, voice cautious. We understand the gravity. That's why we're already preparing mandatory training revisions, anonymous reporting enhancements, and a formal commitment to external audits of in-flight conduct for all cabin crew. Start with this, Vanessa said, placing her phone on the table and pressing play. The room fell into stillness as the audio began. A quiet recording, captured by a passenger in row 5, of Diana's voice speaking to Jessica in the galley. Clear, cold. She didn't look like a first-class passenger, probably a system glitch, or she got the ticket from someone who didn't know better. The voices of a few passengers reacting faintly in the background could be heard, the disgust, the awkward laughter. Then Jessica's reply, "You didn't check anyone else's ticket." The room shifted. No one breathed for a moment. Vanessa stopped the recording and looked up. That's your culture. No one at the table argued. Russell cleared his throat. You'll be receiving a direct line to our policy council. We want you involved in shaping the reforms, not just as a guest voice, but as a core policy advisor. Vanessa blinked once slowly. You want to offer me a consulting position? No, Russell said. We want to contract you as a lead legal strategist for our ethics division, rebuilding it, reshaping the response mechanisms. From the inside. Elliot turned to Vanessa but said nothing. He was letting her decide. Vanessa looked around the table, taking in the carefully arranged remorse, the defensive posture behind polite smiles, the damage control masquerading as humility. She leaned forward. You don't get to use me to clean up your image. You're not offering me a position. You're offering me control. The COO raised his eyebrows slightly. Would that be unacceptable? Vanessa thought for a moment. It would be insufficient. I'm not here to be your shield. I'm here to be your reckoning. Elliot finally smiled. Vanessa reached for the letter, opened it slowly, then folded it shut without reading. I'll be in touch with my terms, she said. Russell nodded, swallowing hard. Understood. As Vanessa and Elliot stood, the room rose with them, but this time, no one reached out to shake her hand. Because they all understood now. She wasn't someone you welcomed politely. She was someone you listened to. Carefully. They exited the room, walking slowly down the quiet corridor back toward the terminal. Vanessa's heels echoed off the polished floor, but her thoughts were louder. She hadn't come for revenge. She came to make sure no one else ever sat in 3A and felt small again. And now, she had the power to make it so. Outside the executive wing, the normal rhythm of the airport continued, travelers rushing to gates, children tugging at parents, flight announcements echoing overhead. But for Vanessa Clark, the world had shifted. She walked beside Elliot Grant in the quiet space between baggage claim and the private car service entrance, her mind still processing the weight of everything. She wasn't shaken. She wasn't angry. What she carried now was something more enduring than emotion. She carried clarity. Elliot glanced at her as they approached the glass doors leading to the curb. You said exactly what needed to be said. Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. It still wasn't enough. Elliot nodded. But it was a beginning. Outside, a sleek black sedan waited. Their driver, already briefed by Elliot's team, opened the door and stood back. Vanessa paused before stepping in. What happens next? She asked. After this meeting, after the headlines fade, will they actually change anything? Or will they just file a report and wait for people to forget? They don't get to forget, Elliot said, his voice firmer now. Because you're not walking away. You'll be in the room now, writing the policies, overseeing the people they used to protect. Vanessa nodded, but her face didn't soften. It still doesn't erase what happened. No, Elliot said, but it makes sure it never happens again without consequences. As they settled into the car, Vanessa's phone buzzed once more. This time, it wasn't from the firm, or a journalist, or even an airline executive. It was a message forwarded from the airline's internal staff network, a copy of a letter. To all flight staff subject, immediate policy update, passenger interaction protocols. Effective immediately, all flight attendants are required to complete updated bias training modules before returning to duty. Any form of physical engagement with passengers, including verbal confrontation deemed escalatory, will now be subject to immediate legal review and third-party arbitration. Passenger complaints involving race, class, or inappropriate conduct will be escalated directly to the Executive Oversight Team for independent review. This change has been made possible through the consultation of legal strategist Vanessa Clark. Your compliance is not requested. It is required. Vanessa stared at the screen, rereading it twice. They moved fast, she said. Elliot's voice held a note of pride. Because you didn't give them a choice. Vanessa leaned back against the seat and looked out the tinted window. Outside, travelers wheeled their suitcases across crosswalks. Taxi cabs pulled up and drove away, and airline crew in uniform walked briskly between terminals. Just like Diana once did. The memory of the slap didn't burn anymore. It didn't hurt. It didn't even hum in the background. What lingered instead was the silence that followed it. The silence of passengers who looked away. The silence of a system that needed to be called out to react. The silence of people who only understood power when they saw it. That silence had been broken. She turned to Elliot again. She hasn't reached out, Vanessa said, meaning Diana. She will, Elliot replied, when the silence catches up to her. Vanessa didn't ask what he meant. She understood. The consequences weren't over, not for Diana, not for the culture that had backed her. Accountability had only begun to roll forward, and when it didn't stop for apologies made too late. The car merged into traffic, headed for the city. Vanessa pulled out her tablet and opened a new document. She titled it simply, Passenger Rights and Crew Accountability, a New Standard. And as she began typing, the weight of the cabin, the eyes that judged her, the slap that tried to erase her, all of it became fuel. Not for revenge, but for rebuilding. It was no longer about her. It was about what came after her. Because systems only change when someone refuses to let them recover too quickly. And Vanessa wasn't done making them remember. 3 days later, in a quiet apartment on the outskirts of the city, Diana Briggs sat on the edge of her bed, her airline uniform crumpled in a laundry basket nearby, untouched since the day she was escorted off the plane. The apartment, usually so organized, was a mess of unopened mail, a coffee mug left too long on the table, and a laptop blinking with unattended HR messages. The silence was louder than the noise she had once controlled mid-flight. She had spent her career giving orders, making announcements, conducting safety demonstrations with authority in her voice. Now, she couldn't bring herself to speak to anyone at all. On the kitchen counter sat her suspension letter. Formal, cold, no apology, no discussion, just instructions. Do not report to the airport. Do not contact staff. Do not enter airline property. Await further notification pending investigation. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from a colleague. Press conference tomorrow. Vanessa Clark's leading the panel, whole company watching. You should too. Diana didn't reply. She scrolled through social media, her name buried under hashtags. Accountability in the air. 3A incident. The Vanessa Clark. There were articles, clips, anonymous passengers posting their versions of what they saw. Some defended Diana. Most didn't. But the damage was beyond her reputation now. It had taken on a life of its own, a movement, a demand for change, and she was its unwilling symbol. She tapped open one of the videos. It was a recording from the aircraft, not of the slap, but of Vanessa, after it happened, speaking calmly in her seat, asking Diana, "Why me? Why only me?" The video had gone viral. A soft voice interrupted Diana's spiraling thoughts. "Mom?" Her daughter stood in the hallway, no more than 10 years old, holding a tablet. "I saw your name on the internet," the girl said. "Why are they saying you hit someone?" Diana's stomach dropped. She reached out quickly, her voice catching. "Don't worry about that. It's just grown-up stuff." Her daughter didn't look convinced. "Was she mean to you?" the girl asked. Diana hesitated. "She wasn't," she said finally. "I was wrong." The words felt like bricks in her mouth, but they came out, barely. That night, after putting her daughter to bed, Diana opened her laptop. The airline's internal staff portal loaded slowly, but eventually displayed a blinking notification. Mandatory training reassignment, precondition to future employment. She clicked the link. On screen appeared a live recording from the company's newest initiative, Ethics in the Air, a conversation on power, race, and bias. At the front of a conference room, wearing a charcoal gray suit and speaking without notes, stood Vanessa Clark. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "We're not here to punish individuals. We're here to rebuild systems. But make no mistake, systems are built by people who make choices. And when those choices harm others, accountability isn't revenge. It's justice." The moment I was questioned about my seat, I knew it wasn't about procedure. It was about perception. And when that perception turned into a slap, it wasn't just my dignity that was hit. It was the silence that followed that did the real damage. So today, we rewrite the policy. Today, we stop giving silence permission. Diana leaned back, the words settling into her like cold water down her spine. The program ended with a set of new staff directives: zero tolerance for physical engagement, anonymous internal reporting line, managed externally, real-time bias incident flagging, recorded in employee profiles. Every crew member, past, present, future, required to complete recertification under Vanessa Clark's direct framework. Diana sat frozen. She had spent her career climbing a ladder. She never imagined she would become the reason someone else redesigned the entire building. She closed the laptop. She opened her inbox. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Finally, she began to type. To Vanessa Clark. Subject, I know it's late. I don't expect a reply. I'm not writing to defend myself. I'm not writing for forgiveness. I'm writing because my daughter asked me if the woman I hit was mean to me. And I couldn't lie. You weren't. I was wrong. I saw you, judged you, silenced you, and you never raised your voice. You stood taller by staying seated than I ever did standing in uniform. I don't deserve your understanding, but I wanted you to hear it from me before anyone else says it for me. You changed everything, and I'm not going to pretend that didn't start with me." She signed the email and hit send. She sat in the dark, not expecting closure. But maybe, just maybe, taking responsibility was the only place she could start to rebuild from. Because even silence had a cost. And now, she finally understood who had paid for it. The morning of the press conference arrived with a sharpness in the air. One of those days where everything feels different before anything has even begun. A private media room had been reserved on the top floor of the airline's corporate headquarters, overlooking a sprawling city skyline. It wasn't the usual location for public statements, but this wasn't the usual kind of announcement. Cameras were already lined up, reporters seated in tight rows, executives standing at the back, silent and stiff. At the front stood a simple podium bearing the airline's logo. But this time, the audience wasn't waiting for a brand to speak. They were waiting for a woman. Vanessa Clark stepped into the room, wearing a fitted black suit and low heels, no jewelry except a small silver watch. She didn't smile. She didn't greet anyone. She walked directly to the podium and stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the silence settle. She didn't need a script. She didn't need permission. She spoke. 3 days ago, I was humiliated in front of a cabin full of passengers. I was slapped by someone who wore a uniform meant to represent trust. I was questioned, not because of what I said or how I behaved, but because of what I looked like and where I was sitting. And while the airline has issued apologies, made statements, and offered me a role in shaping future policy, I want to be clear, I'm not here to be your face of progress. I'm here to be your mirror. A flicker ran through the room. No one dared move. This isn't about one flight. This isn't about one slap. This is about the thousands of moments that happen every day, quiet ones, unseen, when someone is made to feel like they don't belong. Because of their name, because of their skin, because of someone else's assumption of who has the right to exist in certain spaces. Behind her, monitors lit up with bold text. Passenger Rights Initiative Inclusive Service Policy. Phase 1. Vanessa continued. The policies I've helped author won't just sit in an employee handbook. They will be enforced with consequence. Flight crews will no longer have unchecked authority to silence passengers based on bias. Every complaint involving discrimination will be reviewed externally. Every act of misconduct, no matter how small, will be recorded and tracked. Because what gets ignored gets repeated. And I refuse to let that happen again. A single camera clicked. I didn't ask for this role. I didn't ask to be made into a headline. But if I've been placed in this spotlight, I'll use it. Not to be celebrated, but to hold every door open for those who come behind me. A pause. Her voice lowered slightly, but the weight in her words only grew stronger. Diana Briggs thought she was correcting a mistake when she asked me to leave my seat. But the mistake wasn't mine, and it never was. Vanessa stepped back. She didn't wait for applause. She didn't expect it. She left the podium the way she had entered it, direct, composed, purposeful. Outside the building, a crowd had gathered. Activists, advocates, former airline passengers holding signs that read things like, I was 3A2. Service, not suspicion. She changed the rules. Vanessa stepped outside into the crowd. A few people clapped. Some just watched in silence, eyes full of quiet respect. She spotted one woman near the back, early 40s, dressed plainly, standing still. Her eyes met Vanessa's and held there. It was Diana. No uniform, no badge, just a former authority figure stripped of title and control. Vanessa didn't approach. She didn't nod. She simply turned away and continued walking, leaving Diana exactly where she needed to be, behind her. Later that evening, Vanessa returned to her apartment, a quiet place filled with soft lamplight and the faint hum of the city outside. Her phone buzzed and she reached for it, half expecting another media request or message from the board. But it was something else, a forwarded internal memo from Airline CEO Russell Langley to all airline staff. Subject, a new standard. We no longer operate in the world we used to. After what occurred on Flight 727, we have been forced to confront truths about our system that many of us ignored for far too long. There will be no going back. Going forward, our culture will be measured not by how we serve the privileged, but how we protect the dignity of every human being on board. We owe that not just to Vanessa Clark, but to everyone who was ever silenced, dismissed, or made to feel like less. Change isn't a slogan, it's a system, and we've just begun rebuilding ours. Vanessa set the phone down and stood by the window, watching the city breathe beneath her. She had started this week being questioned for sitting in a seat she earned. She was ending it rewriting the rules for who gets to sit where, and why they should never be questioned again. And this time, no one would dare ask if she belonged. They would know. A week had passed since the incident that sparked a national conversation, yet the ripples hadn't stopped moving. The media had latched onto the story, not because it was rare, but because it was raw, unfiltered, a quiet confrontation that had exposed a loud truth. Editorials poured in. Think pieces dissected every angle. News anchors replayed Vanessa Clark's speech at the press conference, line by line. The phrase, "I'm not here to be your face of progress, I'm here to be your mirror," had become a headline, a quote, a movement. But Vanessa didn't let herself be swept up in the noise. She returned to work quietly, refusing interviews, turning down spotlight appearances, and choosing instead to focus on what she had always done best, building systems that protect the people inside them. This time, her work wasn't buried in conference rooms. It was public, transparent. Every policy drafted was published on a news section of the airline's website, every update signed by her name. Clark Policy Standard, Passenger Protection and Crew Accountability Charter Live. Active, legally binding. She didn't want credit. She wanted enforcement. At her firm's headquarters, she had been promoted without ceremony to Senior Ethics Counsel. Not because of the press, but because Elliot had demanded it. "If we don't elevate the people who actually fix things," he told the board, "then we're no better than the ones who let it happen in the first place." Still, despite the momentum, Vanessa remained grounded. Her days were long, her inbox full, her calendar packed with policy reviews, staff briefings, and internal oversight meetings. Yet each evening as she left the office, she walked with the same quiet calm she carried the day Diana had tried to erase her dignity. But the world around her now moved differently. One Thursday afternoon, she was at the airport again. This time for a routine business trip. She didn't travel with Elliot this time. She didn't need backup anymore. She arrived alone, passed through security alone, and approached the gate without fanfare. Her ticket read, Seat 1A. At the boarding gate, a young flight attendant, a new hire by the look of the uniform, smiled warmly as Vanessa handed over her pass. "Thank you, Ms. Clark," she said gently. "Welcome aboard. And I just wanted to say, we've read your training modules, all of us. We talk about them every week." Vanessa nodded once, appreciative but reserved. "Thank you. You made it safer for a lot of people," the woman added almost shyly. Vanessa paused. "Then make sure no one forgets why it needed to be made safer in the first place." The flight attendant nodded, understanding. Vanessa stepped into the aircraft and moved to her seat at the very front. Seat 1A. She placed her bag beneath the seat, buckled her belt, and looked out the window. This time, no one questioned her. No one hovered with suspicion. No one demanded her ID. No one asked who she was or why she was there. She was greeted, respected, left alone. As passengers boarded, a few gave her passing glances of recognition. But they were different now. They didn't carry doubt or disapproval. They carried acknowledgement, silent gratitude. Across the aisle, an elderly black woman took her seat and gave Vanessa a quiet smile. It was a smile that said, "Thank you for making this possible," even if the words never came out. Vanessa smiled back. As the flight attendants prepared the cabin for takeoff, Vanessa reached into her carry-on and pulled out a slim folder. It held the next draft of a policy expansion, one focused on increasing reporting channels for non-English-speaking passengers. Her work wasn't finished. It probably never would be. But now she wasn't fighting alone. She had changed more than policy. She had shifted the culture. Outside the aircraft window, the sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a golden hue across the tarmac. The engines hummed to life. The plane began to move, and as it accelerated down the runway, Vanessa closed her eyes, not to escape, but to embrace the stillness she had earned. Because she no longer had to defend her right to exist in a space. She had redefined it. From 3A to 1A, not just a change in seating, but a rise in position, in power, in purpose. And this time, everyone knew exactly who she was, and why she could never be silenced again. If this story moved you, make sure to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories coming soon. Your support